street. That is what we are, rolling in between. How can we be wrong? Sail away.
In 1967, a young woman stepped off a Greyhound bus in Nashville with only $20 in her pocket and songs no one wanted to hear. Executives laughed at her high-pitched voice, mocked her big blonde hair, and told her she'd never have a future in country music. But this woman would go on to build an empire worth over $650 million, write more than 3,000 songs, and become one of the most beloved figures in American history. There is a woman who rose from a cabin with no electricity in the Smoky Mountains and conquered the world, who transformed rejection into resilience, who gave the world Jolene, I Will Always Love You, and 9 to 5. But behind the rhinestones, the wigs, and that iconic smile, there is a story of devastating losses, battles fought in the shadows, and scars that not even millions of dollars could heal. How did a barefoot girl from a one-room cabin become a global icon? What did she sacrifice to reach the top? Why, after 6 decades of stardom, does she still carry wounds that fame could never erase? And what almost made her give up everything at the most lucrative moment of her career? Before we answer those questions, we need to go back to the beginning, to a childhood of hunger, humiliation, and a poverty so deep it shaped everything she would become. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, deep in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains. She was the 4th of 12 children, born into a family where poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a way of life that defined every waking moment. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, was a sharecropper and construction worker who could neither read nor write. He worked brutally long days in the tobacco fields, his hands calloused and bleeding, yet the money he brought home was never enough. Her mother, Avie Lee Parton, was a woman of quiet strength who sang to her children even when there was no food on the table, filling their empty stomachs with melodies instead of meals. The cabin they called home had no electricity, no running water, and no insulation against the freezing mountain winters. 12 children crammed into a space barely large enough for 4. They slept 3 or 4 to a bed, wrapped in threadbare quilts stitched together from flour sacks. In winter, ice formed on the inside of the windows, and the children would wake shivering, their breath visible in the frigid air. Dolly would later recall with heartbreaking honesty, "We were dirt poor. I mean, seriously poor. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together." But it wasn't just material poverty that scarred her. It was the humiliation that came with it. At school, she was the girl the other children whispered about. The one who wore clothes stitched together from rags, whose shoes had holes so big her toes poked through. She remembered standing in line at school, watching the other girls in their store-bought dresses, feeling the burn of shame creep up her neck. "I knew I was poor," she admitted years later, "but I didn't know I was supposed to be ashamed of it until I saw how people looked at me." Her classmates mocked her relentlessly. They called her trash, laughed at her homemade dresses, and excluded her from their circles. Teachers pitied her, but offered little comfort. The message was clear. She didn't belong. She was less than. And that wound, carved into her young heart, would never fully heal. But Dolly's childhood wasn't defined only by suffering. It was also shaped by music. Her mother sang old Appalachian ballads while cooking beans over the wood stove. Her grandfather, a Pentecostal preacher, filled Sunday services with fervent gospel hymns that shook the walls of the tiny mountain church. Music became the only currency the Parton family had in abundance. By the time Dolly was 7 years old, she was writing her own songs, scratching lyrics onto scraps of paper with broken pencils. At 10, she was performing on local radio stations in Knoxville, her voice already carrying a power and emotion far beyond her years. At 13, she made her debut at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, standing on that legendary stage in a homemade dress, trembling but determined. Yet even as she sang, even as applause echoed around her, the poverty never loosened its grip. Back home, there were still nights when dinner was nothing but cornbread and beans. Nights when her father sat at the table, head in his hands, silently crushed by the weight of mouths he couldn't feed. Nights when Dolly lay awake, staring at the ceiling, vowing with every fiber of her being that she would escape. "I had to get out," she later confessed. "Not because I didn't love my family. I loved them more than anything. But I knew if I stayed, I would drown in that poverty. I would become just another forgotten girl in the mountains." So the day after she graduated high school in 1964, Dolly Parton didn't wait. She packed everything she owned into a cardboard suitcase, hugged her weeping mother goodbye, and boarded a Greyhound bus to Nashville. She was 18 years old, carrying $20, a guitar, and an unshakable belief that somewhere beyond those mountains, her voice would finally be heard. Her childhood had been brutal. It had left her scarred, hungry, and haunted by shame. But it had also forged something unbreakable inside her, a fire that no rejection, no mockery, no closed door could ever extinguish. The barefoot girl from the one-room cabin was about to walk into an industry that would try to crush her. But she had already survived worse. When Dolly Parton arrived in Nashville in 1964, she believed her talent would speak for itself. She believed that her voice, her songs, and her determination would be enough. She was wrong. Nashville was a city built on dreams, but it devoured dreamers. Every day, hundreds of young hopefuls flooded into Music Row, guitars slung over their shoulders, convinced they were destined for stardom. Most left broken, forgotten, and buried under the weight of rejection. Dolly was determined not to be one of them. She moved into a cramped, roach-infested apartment with barely enough room to turn around. The rent was cheap, but even cheap was expensive when you had nothing. She survived on packets of ketchup stolen from diners, crackers, and whatever free food she could find. Some nights, she went to bed with her stomach growling, the hunger a cruel echo of the childhood she thought she'd escaped. She knocked on every door she could find. Record labels, publishing houses, radio stations, anywhere that might give her a chance. But the doors didn't just close. They slammed. Hard. Executives looked at her and saw a joke. They saw a girl with too much makeup, hair piled too high, and clothes too tight. They heard her thick mountain accent and dismissed her before she even opened her mouth to sing. One executive told her bluntly, "You're too country for country music." Another laughed and said, "Honey, go home. Nashville doesn't need another nobody." The cruelest rejection came when they did let her sing. She would pour her heart into a performance, notes trembling with emotion, only to be met with indifferent shrugs. "Your voice is too high-pitched," they said. "Your songs are too simple. You'll never be taken seriously." Every rejection carved a little deeper. Every dismissal whispered the same lie she'd heard in childhood. "You're not good enough." And in those moments, alone in her tiny apartment, Dolly wondered if they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe the girl from the mountains didn't belong in Nashville after all. But Dolly refused to quit. She took any job she could find, singing demos for other artists, waitressing, working odd gigs that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. She wrote songs relentlessly, filling notebooks with lyrics born from heartbreak, homesickness, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Then, in 1966, a small glimmer of hope appeared. A struggling label called Monument Records offered her a contract. It wasn't the dream deal she'd imagined. It was restrictive, low-paying, and came with creative control she didn't have. But it was a door, however narrow, and Dolly kicked it wide open. Her first single, Dumb Blonde, was released in 1967. It was a defiant anthem, a middle finger to everyone who had underestimated her. The song climbed the charts, reaching number 24 on the country charts. For the first time, people were hearing her name. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. But success came with a price. Monument Records wanted to mold her into something more palatable, more pop, less country. They wanted to strip away the very essence of who she was. The mountain girl with the big hair and bigger dreams. Dolly fought back, but the label held the power. She recorded songs she didn't believe in, smiled through photo shoots that made her feel like a product, and swallowed her frustration in silence. Worse still, even as her songs began to chart, the money didn't follow. Her contract was exploitative, designed to enrich the label while keeping her struggling. She was selling records, but she was still scraping by, still haunted by the fear that it could all disappear in an instant. And then there was the loneliness. Nashville was filled with people, but Dolly felt utterly alone. The industry was cutthroat, friendships were transactional, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. She missed her family desperately, missed the mountains, missed the simplicity of a life where love mattered more than money. She later admitted, "There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I thought maybe I should just go home, marry a local boy, and forget about all of this." But just as despair threatened to swallow her whole, fate intervened in the form of a man named Porter Wagoner. Porter was a country music star, famous for his flashy rhinestone suits and his syndicated television show, The Porter Wagoner Show. In 1967, he was looking for a new female co-host, someone fresh and talented to replace the departing Norma Jean. His team suggested Dolly. Porter saw something in her, raw talent wrapped in charisma and grit. He offered her a spot on his show, a regular paycheck, and national exposure. It was the break she had been praying for. But it came with strings attached, strings that would soon feel more like chains. Dolly accepted, stepping onto Porter's stage with a smile that hid the exhaustion, the fear, and the scars of years spent fighting just to be heard. She didn't know it yet, but this partnership would be both her salvation and her prison. It would launch her to stardom, but it would also trap her in a battle for creative freedom that would take years to win. The girl who arrived in Nashville with $20 and a dream had survived the rejection. She had clawed her way into the industry. But the fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. When Dolly Parton joined the Porter Wagoner Show in 1967, it felt like a dream come true. After years of rejection, hunger, and obscurity, she was finally on national television, performing for millions of viewers every week. Porter Wagoner was a household name, and now she was standing beside him, singing duets, sharing the spotlight, and earning a steady paycheck for the first time in her life. The show was a phenomenon. Week after week, audiences fell in love with the chemistry between Porter and Dolly. Their voices blended beautifully, and their banter felt natural, warm, almost familial. Dolly's star began to rise. Her face became recognizable. Her songs started climbing the charts. She was no longer the nobody Nashville had dismissed. She was becoming someone. But behind the rhinestones and the applause, a darker truth was taking root. Porter Wagoner wasn't just her mentor and partner. He was becoming her controller. At first, the arrangement seemed reasonable. Porter had given Dolly her big break, and in return, he expected loyalty. He managed her career, booked her shows, and guided her decisions. He told her what to wear, what to sing, and how to present herself. Dolly, grateful and still somewhat naive, went along with it. After all, Porter knew the industry. He had been a star for years. She trusted him. But trust, as Dolly would soon learn, can be a dangerous thing. Porter's control began to tighten like a noose. He didn't just manage her career, he owned it. The contract she had signed tied her to him in ways she hadn't fully understood. He took a significant percentage of her earnings, controlled her recording sessions, and had final say over which songs she could release. When Dolly wrote something she was proud of, something deeply personal, Porter would often dismiss it, insisting she record his choices instead. "He treated me like I was his property," Dolly later admitted, her voice heavy with the weight of those years. "He didn't see me as an artist. He saw me as an extension of his brand." The creative suffocation was unbearable. Dolly was a songwriter at heart, a storyteller who poured her soul into every lyric. But Porter wanted her to be his sidekick, his pretty blonde co-star who smiled, sang on cue, and never stepped out of line. He wanted her to stay exactly where he had placed her, beside him, below him, dependent on him. And when Dolly dared to push back, the battles began. They fought constantly. Heated arguments backstage, tense silences during rehearsals, and bitter standoffs over song choices. Porter could be charming and generous one moment, then cold and controlling the next. He wielded his power like a weapon, reminding her again and again that without him, she would be nothing. "He made me feel like I owed him everything," Dolly confessed years later. "And maybe I did, but I also knew I was drowning." The toll was devastating. Dolly began to lose herself. The vibrant, fearless girl who had arrived in Nashville with nothing but a dream was fading, replaced by a woman trapped in a gilded cage. She smiled for the cameras, sang her heart out on stage, and then went home and wept in private. The fame she had fought so hard for felt hollow. The success felt like a betrayal of the artist she truly wanted to be. And yet, she couldn't leave. The contract bound her to Porter for years. Breaking free would mean lawsuits, financial ruin, and possibly the end of her career. Porter made that clear. He held all the cards, and he wasn't letting go. But even in the darkest moments, Dolly kept writing. Late at night, alone in her Nashville apartment, she poured her pain, frustration, and longing into songs. Songs that Porter would never hear. Songs that spoke of freedom, heartbreak, and the desperate need to reclaim her life. One of those songs was, "I Will Always Love You." It wasn't a love song in the traditional sense. It was a goodbye, a farewell to Porter, to the partnership that had both saved her and suffocated her. It was her way of saying, "Thank you for what you gave me, but I have to go. I have to be free." In 1974, after 7 years of battles, tears, and soul-crushing compromise, Dolly finally gathered the courage to leave. She walked into Porter's office, her hands trembling, and sang him the song she had written. "I Will Always Love You" played softly on her guitar, every note a plea, every word a goodbye. Porter listened in silence. When she finished, there were tears in his eyes. He didn't want to let her go, but even he couldn't deny the power of what she had just sung. Reluctantly, he agreed to release her from the contract. But the freedom came at a cost. Porter demanded a settlement, money Dolly didn't have. She had to borrow, scrape, and sacrifice just to buy back her own career. And even after she left, the wounds lingered. The years she had spent under his control had left scars that no amount of success could erase. "I will always be grateful to Porter," Dolly said years later, her voice soft but firm. "But I will also never forget what it cost me to break free." The partnership with Porter Wagoner had been both her salvation and her prison. It had given her a platform, but it had nearly stolen her soul. And as Dolly stepped away from his shadow, she made a vow to herself. Never again would she let anyone control her voice, her art, or her destiny. The girl from the mountains had fought her way into Nashville. Now, the woman she had become was ready to fight for something even more important: her freedom. When Dolly Parton finally broke free from Porter Wagoner in 1974, she stood at a crossroads. She had her freedom, but freedom came with terrifying uncertainty. She had no manager, no guaranteed income, and a mountain of debt from buying out her contract. The industry whispered that she had made a mistake, that without Porter, she would fade into obscurity. They were wrong. Dolly didn't just survive her independence, she exploded into superstardom. And she did it entirely on her own terms. Her first move was bold and defiant. She took "I Will Always Love You," the song she had written as a farewell to Porter, and released it as a single in 1974. The song was raw, vulnerable, and heartbreakingly honest. It wasn't flashy or commercial. It was simply real. The world responded. "I Will Always Love You" shot to #1 on the country charts, staying there for weeks. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment. People didn't just hear a breakup song, they heard a woman reclaiming her voice, they heard freedom. But Dolly wasn't satisfied with one hit. She was just getting started. Throughout the late 1970s, she released a string of iconic songs that would define her legacy. Jolene in 1973, a haunting ballad about jealousy and insecurity that showcased her storytelling genius. Here You Come Again in 1977, a crossover pop hit that proved she could dominate beyond country music. And in 1980, she released 9 to 5, the anthem of working-class America, a song that became not just a hit, but a movement. 9 to 5 wasn't just a song. It was a rallying cry, written for the film of the same name, in which Dolly also starred alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. The song captured the frustration, humor, and resilience of millions of workers grinding through thankless jobs. It shot to #1 on both the country and pop charts, sold over 1 million copies, and earned Dolly an Academy Award nomination. For a woman who had once been told she was too country and too much, crossing over into pop and film was a triumph that silenced every doubt. Dolly wasn't just a country star anymore. She was a global icon. But success didn't come without sacrifice. The relentless pace of recording, touring, and promoting took a brutal toll. Dolly was everywhere: television, radio, magazine covers, concert stages. But the cost was her health, her privacy, and her peace of mind. She later admitted, "I was running myself into the ground. I thought if I stopped, even for a moment, it would all disappear." The pressure was suffocating. Behind the dazzling smile and the larger-than-life persona, Dolly was exhausted, anxious, and struggling to hold it all together. She pushed herself harder than anyone else, determined to prove that she belonged, that she wasn't just lucky, that she had earned every bit of success. And yet, even as she climbed higher, the ghosts of her past followed her. The poverty of her childhood, the years of rejection, the battles with Porter. They had all left wounds that fame couldn't heal. She carried them quietly, hidden beneath the rhinestones and the laughter. In the early 1980s, Dolly's empire continued to expand. She launched her own production company, taking full control of her music, her image, and her business. She became one of the first female country artists to own her masters, a move that would later earn her hundreds of millions of dollars. But perhaps her most audacious dream was yet to come. In 1986, Dolly opened Dollywood, a theme park in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, just miles from the one-room cabin where she was born. It was more than a business venture. It was a homecoming, a way of giving back to the people and the place that had shaped her. Critics scoffed. A country singer opening a theme park? It was dismissed as a vanity project, a risky gamble that would surely fail. But Dolly knew something they didn't. She knew that people didn't just want to visit a theme park. They wanted to visit her story. They wanted to walk where she had walked, to feel the magic of the mountains, to believe that dreams could come true no matter where you started. Dollywood became a phenomenon. Today, it attracts over 3 million visitors a year and generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. It's one of the most successful theme parks in America, and it has become the largest employer in the region, providing jobs and hope to communities that had been forgotten. "I wanted to bring jobs back to my people," Dolly said simply. "They gave me everything. This was my way of giving something back." By the end of the 1980s, Dolly Parton had achieved what once seemed impossible. She had conquered country music, crossed over into pop, dominated film and television, and built a business empire. She had proven that the barefoot girl from the mountains could not only survive in Nashville, she could own it. But even as the world celebrated her success, Dolly knew the truth. Triumph was fragile. Fame was fleeting. And the higher you climbed, the harder you could fall. The battles weren't over. In fact, some of the hardest ones were still ahead. To the world, Dolly Parton had it all. Fame, fortune, adoration from millions, and an empire built on grit and talent. But behind the glittering image, behind the rhinestones and the ever-present smile, was a woman battling demons that no amount of success could silence. At the center of her private life was a paradox that few understood. Dolly Parton, one of the most famous women in the world, was also one of the loneliest. In 1966, just 2 years after arriving in Nashville, Dolly married Carl Thomas Dean, a quiet, reserved man she met outside a laundromat on her first day in the city. It was love at first sight, or so the story goes. Carl was the opposite of everything Dolly was. He shunned the spotlight, avoided crowds, and wanted nothing to do with fame. While Dolly chased stages and cameras, Carl stayed home, running his asphalt paving business in quiet anonymity. Their marriage was unconventional from the start. Carl rarely appeared in public with Dolly. He never attended award shows, premieres, or concerts. In over 5 decades of marriage, he's been photographed with her only a handful of times. To many, it seemed like a marriage that existed only in name. But Dolly always defended it fiercely. "Carl is my rock," she said in interviews, her voice warm but guarded. "He doesn't need the spotlight. He just needs me to come home." And yet, the truth was more complicated. The price of her career was absence. Dolly was constantly on the road, recording, touring, filming, building her empire. Weeks turned into months away from home. Phone calls replaced conversations. Letters replaced intimacy. Carl stayed in Tennessee, living a quiet life, while Dolly lived 1,000 lives on stages around the world. She later admitted with painful honesty, "There were times I felt like I was married to my career more than to Carl. I loved him, but I wasn't there, and that guilt ate at me." The loneliness was suffocating. Even surrounded by crowds, By fans screaming her name, by colleagues and collaborators, Dolly felt utterly alone. Fame, she discovered, was isolating. People saw the icon, the legend, the rhinestone-covered persona, but few saw the woman beneath. Few understood the weight she carried. And then, in the mid-1980s, the weight became too much. Dolly suffered a devastating emotional collapse. The exact details remain private. She has spoken about it only sparingly, but she has confessed that during this period, she battled severe depression, anxiety, and even thoughts of suicide. "I was at my lowest," she admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I was successful by every measure, but inside, I felt empty, worthless. I couldn't see a way forward." The pressure had been building for years. The relentless schedule, the constant need to prove herself, the guilt of neglecting her marriage, the fear of losing everything she had fought for. It all came crashing down at once. She later revealed that one particularly dark day, she sat alone with a loaded gun, contemplating ending it all. But just as despair threatened to swallow her whole, something stopped her. Her dog, a little companion she adored, came running into the room, wagging its tail, eyes full of innocent love. "That dog looked at me like I was the whole world," Dolly recalled, tears in her eyes. "And I realized, if I did this, who would take care of him? Who would miss me? And I knew I couldn't do it." It was a fragile moment of grace, a tiny thread of hope that pulled her back from the edge. But the battle wasn't over. Depression doesn't disappear with a single moment of clarity. Dolly sought help, therapy, medication, and the support of the few people she trusted. Slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild herself from the inside out. She also made a promise to herself. She would be more honest. Not with the world, she wasn't ready for that, but with herself. She would stop pretending everything was perfect. She would acknowledge the pain, the loneliness, the cost of the life she had chosen. "I learned that it's okay not to be okay," she said years later. "I learned that you can be strong and still break, and that breaking doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Throughout this period, Carl remained her anchor. He didn't demand explanations or ask her to change. He simply stayed, quiet, steady, unwavering. In a world where everyone wanted something from Dolly, Carl wanted nothing but her happiness. "Carl saved my life in ways he'll never fully understand," Dolly confessed. "He didn't try to fix me. He just loved me, and that was enough." But even as she fought through the darkness, Dolly never stopped working. Work, in some ways, was both her salvation and her curse. It gave her purpose, distraction, and a way to channel her pain into something beautiful. But it also kept her running, afraid to stop, afraid to sit still with the emptiness. She released albums, starred in films, expanded Dollywood, and continued to tour. To the outside world, she was unstoppable. But inside, she was barely holding on. The scars from that period never fully healed. Even today, Dolly speaks carefully about mental health, always acknowledging the struggle but never dwelling too long in the darkness. She has learned to manage it, to live with it, to transform it into empathy for others who suffer in silence. "If my story can help someone else hold on for one more day," she said, "then maybe it was worth it." Dolly Parton's rise to fame was not a fairy tale. It was a battle fought on two fronts, one public, one devastatingly private. She conquered stages, but she also had to conquer herself. And in that quiet, unseen victory, she became more than a star. She became a survivor. Dolly Parton's image, big hair, tight clothes, rhinestones, and an exaggerated femininity, became her trademark. But it also became her burden. For decades, she has been mocked, underestimated, and dismissed as nothing more than a dumb blonde with a big chest and a country twang. The cruelty was relentless. Critics called her a caricature, a joke, a woman who chose spectacle over substance. Late-night comedians made her the punchline. Tabloids obsessed over her appearance, dissecting her body, her hair, her makeup with vicious glee. Even within the music industry, she was often treated as novelty rather than artistry. "People see the hair and the boobs and they think that's all there is," Dolly once said, her voice tinged with frustration. "They don't see the songwriter. They don't see the businesswoman. They just see the costume." But here's the truth. The costume was intentional. Dolly crafted her image with precision, turning herself into a brand, a character, a legend. She once explained, "It costs a lot of money to look this cheap." It was a joke, but it was also a revelation. Dolly knew exactly what she was doing. She weaponized the very stereotypes that were used against her. Still, the judgment cut deep. Women, in particular, were harsh. Some feminists criticized her for playing into male fantasies, for being too sexual, too performative. They saw her as a setback for women's liberation, a woman who chose to be objectified rather than respected. Dolly responded with grace, but also with fire. "I'm not offended by dumb blonde jokes, because I'm not dumb, and I'm not blonde," she said with a sly smile. But beneath the humor was a deeper truth. She refused to let anyone define her worth based on their narrow judgments. The criticism wasn't just about her appearance, it was about her authenticity. Country music purists accused her of selling out when she crossed over into pop. They said she had abandoned her roots, that she cared more about money than music. When "Here You Come Again" became a pop hit, some country stations refused to play it. They saw her success as betrayal. Dolly's response was defiant. "I didn't leave country music. I just took it with me to a bigger stage." And then there were the rumors, vicious, relentless, and deeply personal. For years, tabloids speculated about her marriage to Carl Dean. Some claimed it was a sham, that Carl didn't exist, that he was a cover for Dolly's real relationships. Others whispered that Dolly was secretly gay, pointing to her close friendships with women as evidence. The rumors stung, not because they were true, but because they were invasive. Dolly has always been fiercely private about her personal life, drawing a clear line between the public persona and the woman behind it. But the press didn't care. They pried, they speculated, they invented stories to sell papers. Dolly rarely dignified the rumors with responses. But when she did, her words were measured and firm. "Believe whatever you want," she said, "but my private life is mine, and I'm not giving it to you." Perhaps the most painful chapter came in the 1990s, when Dolly faced brutal body shaming after gaining weight. The tabloids were merciless. Headlines screamed about her ballooning figure. Paparazzi captured unflattering photos. Critics called her washed up, irrelevant, a has-been clinging to past glory. For a woman who had already battled depression and insecurity, the attacks were devastating. She later admitted that during this time, she turned to food for comfort, eating to fill the emptiness inside. The weight gain became both a symptom and a target of her pain. "I was hurting," she confessed, "and the world saw my hurt and turned it into entertainment." But Dolly didn't crumble. She fought back, not with anger, but with reinvention. She committed to getting healthier, not for the cameras, but for herself. She lost the weight, regained her energy, and returned to the stage stronger than before. And when asked about the criticism, she responded with trademark wit. If I see something sagging, bagging, or dragging, I'm going to have it nipped, tucked, or sucked. It was humor, but it was also armor. Dolly had learned long ago that laughter disarms cruelty. If she could laugh at herself first, no one else's mockery could touch her. Yet beneath the jokes, the pain lingered. In rare interviews, she has spoken about the emotional toll of living under constant scrutiny. "You can't let people see you cry," she said, "because if they see you cry, they win. So you smile. You keep going. You survive." There were also professional battles. Record labels tried to control her. Producers wanted to change her sound. Business partners underestimated her intelligence, assuming the dumb blonde act was real. But Dolly outmaneuvered them all. She learned the business inside and out, hired lawyers, studied contracts, and took control of her masters and publishing rights. "I knew I had to protect myself," she said, "because in this industry, if you're not careful, they'll take everything, including your dignity." One of her greatest victories came in the 1990s when Whitney Houston covered "I Will Always Love You" for the film The Bodyguard. The song became a global phenomenon, selling over 20 million copies and becoming one of the best-selling singles of all time. But because Dolly owned the publishing rights, she earned millions, reportedly over $10 million from that single cover alone. It was vindication. The woman they had called dumb had outsmarted an entire industry. But the sweetest revenge wasn't financial. It was cultural. Over time, the narrative shifted. People began to see past the costume. They recognized her songwriting genius, her business acumen, her philanthropy, her resilience. The punchline became the legend. Still, the scars remained. Dolly has admitted that even now, decades into her career, she sometimes hears the old voices, the ones that told her she wasn't smart enough, wasn't serious enough, wasn't worthy of respect. "You carry those wounds forever," she said quietly. "But you learn to walk with them. You learn that survival is its own kind of victory." Dolly Parton fought for her dignity in a world determined to strip it from her. She was mocked, underestimated, and dismissed. But she refused to be defined by anyone else's limitations. She turned judgment into fuel, criticism into creativity, and pain into power. And in doing so, she proved that the woman beneath the rhinestones was far stronger than anyone ever imagined. Fame may have brought Dolly Parton fortune and adoration, but it could never shield her from the cruelest truth of all: loss. And over the years, Dolly would lose the people who mattered most, the ones who knew her not as a legend, but as a daughter, a sister, a friend. The first devastating blow came in 2003, when Dolly lost her younger brother, Larry Parton. Larry had struggled for years with addiction and personal demons, battles that Dolly watched helplessly from a distance, unable to save him no matter how much money or love she poured into trying. His death shattered her. Larry wasn't just her brother. He was a reminder of the childhood they had shared, the poverty they had survived together, the dreams they had once whispered in that crowded one-room cabin. Losing him felt like losing a piece of herself. "I couldn't save him," Dolly admitted, her voice breaking. "I had all this money, all this success, and I couldn't save my own brother." The guilt was unbearable. She replayed every conversation, every missed phone call, every moment she had been on the road instead of home. She wondered if she could have done more, said more, been there more. The what-ifs haunted her. But Larry's death was only the beginning. In 2018, Dolly lost another sibling, her baby brother, Floyd Parton. Floyd had been a songwriter and musician himself, walking a path parallel to Dolly's, though never reaching her level of fame. He had always been proud of his big sister, cheering her on from the sidelines, writing songs that never quite made it to the charts, but carried his heart in every lyric. When Floyd passed away, Dolly was performing. She was on stage when she got the news, thousands of miles away, unable to hold his hand, unable to say goodbye. She finished the show, because that's what Dolly always does. But backstage, she collapsed in grief. "Losing Floyd broke something in me," she later confessed. "He was my baby brother, and I wasn't there." The pattern was cruel and inescapable. Dolly's career had taken her to the pinnacle of success, but that same career had pulled her away from the people she loved most. She was always somewhere else, on a stage, in a studio, at a press event, while life and death unfolded without her. Then, in 2020, the losses became even more personal and devastating. Dolly's longtime friend and collaborator, Kenny Rogers, passed away at the age of 81. Kenny and Dolly had shared a bond that transcended music. Their duet, "Islands in the Stream," had become an anthem, and their friendship had been one of the few genuine connections in an industry built on facades. Kenny's death hit Dolly harder than most people realized. She sobbed openly in interviews, unable to hold back the tears. "I've lost one of my closest friends," she said, her voice trembling, "and I will never be the same." What made it worse was that Dolly couldn't attend his funeral. The world was in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, and she was forced to mourn from a distance, watching the service on a screen, unable to say goodbye in person. It was a cruel echo of every other loss, always too far away, always too late. But perhaps the most heartbreaking loss of all came in 2003, when Dolly's father, Robert Lee Parton, passed away at the age of 79. Robert Lee had been a complicated figure in Dolly's life. He was a man hardened by poverty, unable to read or write, who worked his fingers to the bone but could never provide the life he wished for his children. He was strict, distant, and not prone to expressing emotion. Dolly had spent her entire life chasing his approval, desperate for him to say the words she longed to hear. "I'm proud of you." But those words never came easily. Even as Dolly became a global superstar, even as she bought her parents a beautiful home and showered them with the comforts they had never known, her father remained stoic, restrained, a man of few words. When he died, Dolly was left with a wound that would never heal, the ache of unspoken pride, of love given but never fully expressed. "I know he loved me," Dolly said, tears streaming down her face, "but I wish he had told me more. I wish I had heard him say it." She later revealed that her father's death inspired one of her most personal songs, "Travelin' Through." It was her way of processing the grief, of imagining him finally at peace, free from the burdens of this world. And then, in 2003, just months after losing her father, Dolly lost her mother, Avie Lee Parton, at the age of 80. Avie Lee had been Dolly's foundation, the woman who sang to her children when there was no food on the table, the woman who encouraged Dolly to dream, to sing, to believe that life could be more than a one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Avie Lee had been Dolly's anchor, her safe harbor, the one person who loved her not for what she had become, but for who she had always been. Losing her mother was like losing gravity. Dolly was unmoored, adrift in grief so profound that she could barely function. She canceled appearances. She retreated from the world. She spent days in bed, unable to stop crying, unable to imagine a world without her mother's voice. "She was my everything," Dolly said, her voice barely a whisper. "And when she died, a part of me died too." The losses kept piling up. Over the years, Dolly would lose more siblings, more friends, more pieces of the life she had once known. Each death was a reminder of how fragile everything is, how quickly the people we love can be taken from us. And yet, even in the depths of grief, Dolly found a way to keep going. She poured her pain into music. She wrote songs about loss, about memory, about the people who leave us but never truly disappear. She turned her heartbreak into art, transforming private agony into something the world could feel. "Music is how I survive," she said. "When I can't speak, I sing. When I can't cry anymore, I write. It's the only way I know how to heal." But healing doesn't mean forgetting. Dolly carries every loss with her, every goodbye that came too soon, every moment she wished she could have back. She carries them in the lines of her face, in the tremble of her voice when she speaks of the ones she's lost, in the quiet moments when the spotlight fades and she's left alone with her memories. The world sees Dolly Parton as a symbol of joy, resilience, and light. But behind that light are shadows, deep, dark, and filled with the ghosts of everyone she's loved and lost. And perhaps that is what makes her story so powerful. Because Dolly doesn't just inspire us with her triumphs. She reminds us that even legends grieve, even icons break, and even the strongest among us carry wounds that never fully heal. By the time Dolly Parton reached her 70s, she had already achieved more than most could dream of in 10 lifetimes. She had written over 3,000 songs, sold more than 100 million records, won countless awards, and built a business empire worth over $650 million. She had conquered music, film, television, and business. She was a living legend. But Dolly never stopped. And more importantly, she never forgot where she came from. While other celebrities built monuments to themselves, Dolly built something different, a legacy of giving. A legacy rooted not in ego, but in empathy. Not in vanity, but in service. Because Dolly Parton, the girl who grew up in crushing poverty, never stopped being that girl. She never stopped remembering the hunger, the shame, the helplessness of being poor. And she decided to spend the rest of her life making sure other children didn't have to feel the same way. In 1988, Dolly launched the Dollywood Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of children in her home region of East Tennessee. But her most transformative initiative came in 1995, when she created the Imagination Library, a program that mails free books to children from birth to age 5. The idea was simple but profound. Every child, no matter how poor, deserves access to books. Every child deserves the chance to learn, to dream, to imagine a life beyond their circumstances. What started as a local program in Sevier County, Tennessee, has since exploded into a global phenomenon. Today, the Imagination Library operates in 5 countries and has gifted over 200 million books to children around the world. That's not a typo. 200 million books. Free, no strings attached. "If I can help one child learn to read," Dolly said, her eyes glistening, "then everything I've been through was worth it." But Dolly's generosity didn't stop there. When the devastating wildfires swept through the Smoky Mountains in 2016, destroying homes and displacing thousands of families, Dolly didn't just issue a statement or write a check. She launched the My People Fund, which gave $1,000 a month for 6 months to every family who lost their home in the fires. No questions asked, no applications, no red tape. It was direct, immediate, and deeply personal. Dolly didn't want bureaucracy to slow down help. She wanted people to have what they needed, when they needed it. Over $12 million was distributed, and countless lives were saved from falling into despair. "These are my people," Dolly said simply. And when your people are hurting, you show up. And then came 2020, a year that tested the entire world. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, Dolly once again stepped up. She quietly donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center to fund research. That donation helped fund the development of the Moderna vaccine, one of the most effective tools in the fight against the virus. Dolly didn't announce it with fanfare. She didn't hold a press conference. She just did it. And when the world found out, she shrugged it off with characteristic humility. "I just wanted to help," she said. "I'm just glad if I had any part in saving lives." Her donation literally helped save millions of lives. And yet, when praised, Dolly deflected. "I'm no hero," she insisted. "I just did what anybody with the means would do." But that's not true. Most people with means don't do what Dolly does. Most people hoard, protect, and build walls around their wealth. Dolly tears down walls. She builds bridges. Over the years, Dolly has donated tens of millions of dollars to causes ranging from literacy programs to disaster relief, from children's hospitals to animal shelters. She has funded scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. She has supported LGBTQ+ organizations, standing firmly for equality and love in a world that often chooses division. "I don't care who you love or what you believe," Dolly has said. "If you need help, I'm going to help you." And perhaps that is the most beautiful part of Dolly's legacy, her refusal to judge. In a world increasingly fractured by politics, religion, and ideology, Dolly stands as a reminder that kindness transcends all of it. She is a devout Christian who champions LGBTQ+ rights. She is a proud Southerner who speaks out against racism. She is a conservative woman in many ways, yet she refuses to let labels define her compassion. "I'm for everybody," she says simply. "Love is love. People are people. And we all deserve a chance." At 78 years old, Dolly Parton shows no signs of slowing down. She still writes music, still performs, still runs her empire with the same sharp business mind that built it. But these days, her focus has shifted. She's less concerned with topping the charts and more concerned with leaving the world better than she found it. She has no children of her own, a fact that once brought her deep sadness, but she's come to see it differently now. "I have millions of children," she says. "Every child who gets a book from the Imagination Library is mine. Every family I helped after the fires is mine. I may not have given birth, but I've given life in other ways." And perhaps that is the truest measure of a legacy, not in awards or accolades, not in wealth or fame, but in the lives touched, the futures changed, the hope given to those who had none. Dolly Parton, the girl from the one-room cabin, has become a symbol not just of success, but of humanity. She has proven that you can rise from nothing and still remember what it felt like to have nothing. She has shown that wealth is not measured in what you keep, but in what you give away. Her story is not a fairy tale. It's a battle, fought with grit, grace, and an unshakable belief that kindness is the most powerful currency in the world. And as Dolly approaches the final chapters of her life, she does so with no regrets. She has loved deeply, lost painfully, and lived fully. She has given more than she ever took, and when her time comes, she will leave behind not just songs or buildings or money, but something far more enduring. The memory of a woman who made the world a little softer, a little kinder, a little brighter. "I hope when I'm gone," Dolly once said, her voice soft but steady, "people remember that I cared, that I tried, that I gave everything I had to make things better." And they will. Because Dolly Parton didn't just survive her life. She transformed it into something beautiful, something that will outlive her, inspire generations, and remind us all that no matter where we start, we have the power to change the world. One small act of kindness at a time. Today, Dolly Parton stands as one of the most beloved figures in the world. But her journey was never about fame. It was about survival. It was about turning pain into purpose, rejection into resilience, and loss into love. She is 78 years old now, still writing, still performing, still giving. Her voice may carry the weight of decades, but it has never lost its warmth. Her hands may be lined with age, but they still hold the same guitar she clutched on that Greyhound bus to Nashville over 60 years ago. Dolly still lives in Tennessee, not far from the mountains where she was born. She still wakes up early, still writes songs in the quiet hours before dawn. She still visits Dollywood, walking through the park she built, watching children laugh and families create memories. And when she sees a child holding a book from the imagination library, her eyes still fill with tears. "I never forget," she says softly. "I never forget what it was like to have nothing. And I never want another child to feel that way." Her marriage to Carl Dean, now in its 6th decade, remains as private and steadfast as ever. Carl still avoids the spotlight, still runs his business, still greets Dolly at the door when she comes home from the road. Their love has never been flashy or public, but it has endured. And in a world where everything seems temporary, that endurance is its own kind of miracle. Dolly's health has become more fragile in recent years. She moves a little slower now, her body bearing the scars of a lifetime spent performing, pushing, and giving. But her spirit remains unbroken. She has survived poverty, rejection, depression, loss, and mockery. And she's still here, still smiling, still shining. When asked about her legacy, Dolly doesn't talk about her music or her wealth. She talks about the children, the families, the people who needed help and received it without judgment or strings attached. "I don't need statues or monuments," she says. "I just want people to remember that I tried to be kind, that I used what I had to help others. That's all that matters." Chiti. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Dolly Parton's life. That true success is not measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give away. That fame without compassion is empty. That wealth without generosity is meaningless. That the only legacy worth leaving is one written in the lives you've touched. Dolly Parton was never supposed to make it. She was too poor, too country, too different. The world told her she wasn't enough, but she refused to believe it. She fought her way out of poverty, clawed her way into the music industry, and built an empire on her own terms. But more importantly, she never forgot who she was. She never lost sight of the barefoot girl in the mountains, and she spent her life making sure that girl and millions of others like her would have a chance at something better. So now, dear viewer, the question turns to you. What will you take from Dolly's story? Will you remember that kindness is strength? That humility is power? That the greatest victories are often fought in silence, far from the spotlight? Will you remember that it's okay to struggle, to break, to fall apart, as long as you find the courage to rise again? Will you remember that legacy is not about what you achieve, but about who you help along the way? Dolly Parton's life is not just a story of a country music legend. It's a story of resilience, of humanity, of a woman who turned her pain into purpose and her privilege into service. If her story has moved you, if it has inspired you, if it has reminded you of something you needed to hear, leave a like, share this video. Tell someone about Dolly's journey, because stories like hers don't just deserve to be heard. They need to be remembered. Subscribe for more untold stories of the legends who shaped our world. And remember, no matter where you start, no matter how many times the world tries to break you, you have the power to write your own ending. Dolly Parton proved that. And so can you. Because in the end, we are not defined by what life takes from us, but by what we choose to give back. And that, more than anything, is the legacy of Dolly Parton.